Hey there. Hello.
Hello, friends.
Spiritual Perspectives, Tuesday with Wendy and Angelo.
We
Hope
are
y'all are
ready.
doing okay in this crazy times.
Please register to vote.
Yes, register to vote. We need your voice. So, Wendy and I are going to talk about um, true selves. What is a true self? How to actualize it? What are the things that block you from actualizing its desires? Which I think is an interesting topic, and it's kind of germane. Um, Full disclosure, to two events that we have coming up. One is tomorrow, um, that is done by our colleague. That is called, what's it called, Wendy?
It is called Design Your Authentic Life. Reinvent yourself amid uncertainty.
So there's that, and there is um, you would be getting on the waiting list, waiting for people to drop out because it's full at the current time, which indicates a demand for these kind of services. And the other one, longtime listeners of this event know that I run these things called sacred conversations. So there's a link that's in the chat that tells you where they are. I need to update the dates of them, and they're going to be the last week in July. So anyway, we thought, and I thought in particular, that it'd be good to talk about kind of what the intent of both of these events are to a certain degree, specifically the piece about your true self. So I have a lot to say about this, Wendy, but I'm gonna invite you in first to say uh, what are your thoughts as to what the true self is. Let's put it that way. Let's start there.
So I'm curious about your definition of true self. I have my own definition personal to me, but I want to hear what you believe the true self actually is. So what is it?
Well, I believe that every individual, and there's lots of ways to do this, but this is why I do it. Everybody has three selves. We have your high self, which I'm calling your true self. We have your conscious self, and we have your basic self.
Oh,
And the you could say that somewhere in there you could add what your unconscious self is, but that's kind of like a layer that's there. But for me, those are the main three. And your basic self, its job is to maintain the physical body. And a lot of times, it is at war, if you will. It may resist the um, the dictates, if you will, or what the higher self is trying to tell you, because it wants to keep you stable in a particular sort of situation. So I guess a good example of that, let's say you're trying to lose weight, and you see all these beautiful candies and all this kind of stuff, but aren't good, which on some level your conscious self knows that those aren't really good for you. They're not going to support your desire to lose weight, right? So that's an example of your higher self being at war with your what I'm calling your basic self, which is not an original concept with me, by the way. It was popularized by John Roger, the late John Roger of the movement of spiritual inner awareness. And so the key to getting your basic self to sort of follow your commands, if you will, is to program it. So an example that a lot of people do is that they, with in terms of the losing weight thing, you could like post pictures of yourself that you've made, and what's this app, the graphic app that people use? Just a picture of yourself looking thin, putting it all around your house. So that tells the basic self, oh, I can maybe do this. And it's kind of like, instead of like going to war with it, you're directing it, you're programming it in such a way, to make a long story short. And your conscious self kind of mediates between these two things. So anyway, that's my definition, Wendy.
It's really interesting. I didn't realize that John Rogers had that definition. Hmm. Okay, so how do you go about then becoming more of your true self, which you refer to as your higher self?
Well, let's get the terminology right. It's not like becoming, it's more like sort of embodying its desires. Yourself, to some extent, your body is like a shell, Your body is a shell. You have these kind of, you have an over self that communicates through yourself. Let's put it that way. That's what you want to have happen.
Okay.
And I guess the first thing in the thing, and this is what I do in sacred conversations. You may remember, Wendy. I have a little activity that I do, which enables people really to see how they have been affirmed by other people. In other words, like what do people say that's good about you? And the other side of it is what have you done yourself that makes you feel good inside? And take take people through a kind of a closed-eye process so they can get a look at that. You know, so not to well, I guess since I'm doing it, since I'm talking about it, the other thing is that there's one thing to discover what your true self is. The other piece is that what's blocking its expression. So it's good to have a sense as to do that. Maybe if you're trying to lose weight, what's blocking it? You have like a kind of an identity that is tied, let's say, to this big person, right? That to some extent has worked for you to a certain degree. Maybe it's not what you want, but it's useful to identify how that's worked for you, how that's served for you. Maybe it's given you some certain authority over thinner people in meetings, let's say, to make a wild example. It keeps you solid. It's all sorts of reasons why that might be the case.
Typically protection.
Protection, exactly. Protecting what some people call the ego or the lower self, which is the basic self to a certain extent. So it's nice to know what's blocking you. So the other piece, because to some extent this is sort of an aspirational thing before you can get to actually doing anything about it. For me, it's useful to see kind of what the planet needs right now. Because if you get in touch with what the planet needs, and you can translate that in any way you want in terms of the environment, in terms of social justice, things of that nature. If you believe that there's this thing called Gaia and the planet has a specific goals, needs, desires to be nurtured, if you cooperate and you align your goal to that, you get energy from that. You get the energy from the planet. So anyway, that's the I can't speak what Farnaz is going to do tomorrow, but that's the essence of what the sacred conversation is about.
So as I'm listening to you talking, I have the cinematic trope of the bad devil on the one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder.
Mm.
And so the devil being the basic self, our minds and our waking consciousness, what we typically interact with being that, what did you call that middle
Conscious self,
conscious self? And then the angel being that higher self.
higher
So
self,
would
what
you
we call it true self. Yeah,
true self. So would you say the true self then embodies the best of us?
I would go beyond that. I would even say that that's what you're here to do. You came in with a sort of a contract that this is what you would like to do. Maybe you're not going to make it this time, this life for whatever reason, uh, but eventually you're going to be doing that in the larger scheme of things. And really, this is like maybe I'm getting a little too esoteric here, but you might not make it this time. But this is what you're here to do. This is kind of the seed that was planted in you from birth. This
Okay,
is why you're here.
so the true self, from your perspective, not only includes the best that you can be, but in my language, your soul purpose,
Yes, exactly.
like why you're here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because because we're human and because we're not that, we may have a kind of a different interpretation of it than, let's say, spirit does. So what I mean by that is that, let's say, your higher calling is to be, I'll just throw this out, like a spiritual leader, but you're translating that as an artist, and it's not, the two things are compatible,
Mhm.
but there's a wider range of possibilities than maybe what you're seeing.
Hmm.
That's kind of how I look at it.
So that's really interesting. How does a person then understand what their true self intends for this life?
That is, a difficult question. I think, it's a kind of a lifelong journey to a certain extent, and I guess the way I think about it is that it can change, over the course of a life, and a lot of what involves your human experience, but also your, kind of spiritual strength, ability to see and to ascertain, kind of what the possibilities are. Let's say, because you may have a smaller vision than the possibilities that are there for you.
So if a person is perceiving with their conscious self a smaller version of what their soul intends for this life, how do they open up to the bigger picture?
Hmm. A simple answer is just meditation and doing everything you can to grow spiritually. You know, and I guess another piece of it probably involves, involving other people on a certain level. Because I think in this day and age, the age of individual is, it's sort of not, it's changing a little bit. So I think that, there's more of a sense of the collective that is coming forward, meaning that, my individual goal, is probably in alignment and, works in cooperation with other people who can feed me energy and I could feed them energy, and that's there's kind of like a, accelerating effect in community.
Well, that certainly is in line with the Sacred Inclusion Network
Yes.
because it's really all about connection, spirituality being having connection as one of the foundational principles. And we're in the age of Aquarius, which is all about communal grassroots, um, you know, basically accomplishing things with a flat hierarchy.
Yeah, and it's a networked world.
Yes.
Another way
Yeah.
of saying it. And I think, quite honestly, the next step for us as a network, is to figure out how to do that better. In other words, so there is this thing called the Sacred Inclusion Network. How can we, cooperate, more productively with people like the Source Network? The I forget what there's a number of kind of network type groups, and I've been thinking, what can we do to, so let's take it on a micro level. So we have people that have gone through the sacred conversations, and they get clear about what their sense is, their purpose is. Now, how can we help these people or create an environment for them to network with other people and get support for their thing, and there have to be a collective thing? I think that's a kind of a project that a number of us are involved in right now.
Yeah. So it would be really, I think when I think about connection and I think about what's happening in the world right now, one of the age old tactics used by people in power to keep control over the masses is to keep them disconnected
Hmm.
so that they don't realize how powerful they are as a collective. And a lot of the narrative and rules and systems around racism and lower socioeconomic status, rejecting homeless people and looking down on people that aren't making as much money as other people in a culture, is all meant to keep us separated instead of connected. And I wonder if there needs to be additional paradigm shifting
Mm.
within these social networks that all have this beautiful heart for good, but are still operating in a way that hasn't quite pulled us all together in a really big way. I would love to see all these networking organizations to do something, many things that facilitate masses. And I mean, when I say masses, I mean millions of people moving in the same direction with the same intention. And obviously, in this world where we have so much division, we have to start at something really basic and simple and straightforward. But that can be built on if we could get mass coordination so that people really understand how powerful we are when we're connected.
Yeah, I guess there's two things. One is what you're talking about is kind of a evolution from a hierarchical structures to a network structures. The difference between a hierarchy and a network is a hierarchy is you have people in top controlling things and telling you what to do. In a network, everybody has equal power to some certain extent in the network. Equal power is a little bit of a misnomer because the power shifts according to what's required, let's say. Um, we did an exploration about this a couple of months ago, really, with David Wetton, which is very interesting. And we also had Robert Shrum from the Source Network was part of that conversation. And we're actually, I guess I'd like to put out if people have ideas as to how this kind of network of network effect can multiply. We'd love to hear it from you because I think we're in a place of, we're researching. We're looking for ways to make this happen.
Well, I see it happening with social media. Like I'm 51, so I'm not up on the kids' terms these days on social media. I had to look up what the word stan meant in relation to
I don't know what it means. What does it mean?
The K-pop fans.
Oh, okay. Right.
We call them stans, and I didn't know what that meant, and I had to research it. It's apparently the blending of the word stalker and fan. So you're a stan, you're like a stalker fan. Apparently, you're super obsessed with your K-pop group, BTS being the prime example. But look at the social impact. So you have this pop group from South Korea and they become super popular. They have millions of fans all over the world. And those fans decide to mess with Trump's rally and register millions of tickets to his event, which of course they had no intention of attending. And they had this incredible impact. That was a network of kids making a decision and taking action and having an impact in a really quick way. And I just think the old folks like us who are are not as nimble or as quick as we could be. I mean, it doesn't take much to get millions of people to take a very specific action for a specific reason. And I think our formal organizations, the nonprofit, the NGOs, all these kind of old school organizations are making it harder than it needs to be.
I guess, I do think it's happening, and social media to some extent is a kind of it's not the same thing, but it's a kind of like a byproduct of globalization to a certain extent, and also an accelerator of globalization. So, and it's a tool that flattens to a certain extent, so I mean that it is happening. So the question gets to be is how can we all participate in it, basically? Not social media in particular, but this quickening kind of
Yeah,
thing, the collectivization thing.
yeah.
probably we could participate less on social media, would probably be happier, but that's another conversation.
So, so what is, so let's just say you are able to affect thousands or millions of people to tap into their true self. What is the effect that you would expect of
Wow.
seeing a massive amount of people actually embodying the full intention of their true self?
Boy, that is a wonderful dream to ask the listener. What if we were all kind of moving in the same direction in sort of a positive way? What would the world look like? What would the world look like in terms of environment, in terms of social justice, in terms of income inequality? I mean, how can we dream together so that would be so? I mean, I don't know what it looked like. I may have some ideas, but that's what you would probably have is ideas. I don't really think we're going to know until we get there to a certain extent. But I do think that this moment gives us an opportunity to at least move closer than we've ever been. It's like it's a little bit easy to understate the the depth of what's going on right now. We've been in this for a couple of months. It's almost starting to settle down and feel a little I hate to use this word normal, but this is a big change, and I don't mean to make it to sound all that positive because it's frightening for a lot of people. People don't have my neighbor is he's a and he's just one example. He was like kind of big up in the classical music scene as a booker, a book classical. The classical music industry, not just the classical, let's just talk the performing arts industry, it's pretty much, I don't want to say wiped out, but it is like, wow, you know.
Well, like I just watched Hamilton on Disney Plus,
I did watch half of it. I didn't see the whole thing. I want to watch the rest tonight. Yeah.
but I would never have had access to it had they not been forced to accelerate the timeline of the release because they can no longer perform live.
Right, right. Is that why they did? I didn't know that they did that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly why they did it. Yep.
Yeah, so this is a big moment, and the question gets to be, what are we going to do with it, And one of the things we can do with this is to get clear as to what we're here to do, and to see if we can kind of move in concert with other people that are doing the same thing, and that's kind of what I'm about, in part. I'm also, dealing with my 96-year-old mother and all these other things that humans do. Uh, so anyway,
Wow. So I think you're doing an exploration or you're doing a course. What are you doing on your true self?
well, we're doing Sacred Conversations the third week in July, and there's a link that in the chat that I'm going to update because it has old dates in them. That's what I'm doing, and also tomorrow, our colleague Dr. Fernaz is doing this design your ideal life or design your perfect life or something. I forget what it's called. There's also a link for that, and like I said, at the moment it's oversubscribed, but you can get on the mailing list because we've also encouraged people that aren't going to show up to disengage. So please act on that now. And if for some reason you go to the link and it just tells it's sold out, send a link, send an email to me, Angelo at sacredinclusion.com, and I'll put you on the list.
On the wait list. So just to tie everything together, the whole concept of, you know, being in alignment with the intention of your true self and part of that being in connection, right? And sacred connection with the rest of the world, with other people, with ourselves, kind of being in alignment. Um, I'll just say that if you want to explore the concept of connection and bring your true self, which I would say is synonymous with your authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
then definitely click the link in the comments and sign up or register for the sacred conversations that'll be facilitated at the end of July, because the experience of the sacred conversation gives you an experience of connecting from your authentic self to other people's authentic self.
Mm.
And it's facilitated in a really short period of time in an extremely effective way. And I think it's an opportunity to explore your true self, to explore what it feels like to be truly authentic. I think so many people in their jobs, especially in corporate America, don't get the opportunity to be their authentic self. There's always some kind of barrier, some kind of appropriate mask, and a lot of politics. And so, really being authentic and vulnerable in a safe way is not a common experience for a lot of people. And so I would say take advantage of signing up for the Sacred Conversations experience that will happen at the end of July so that you can feel what it's like to be your authentic self and then to connect with others being their authentic self as well. It's really powerful.
Yeah, and thank you for listening. And we're kind of lonely here. We don't get a lot of comments, so please, click or any reactions that you have. Place it in the video thing, which will show up very shortly. And
Hashtag, tell us what you think.
yes, please, absolutely, a
All
lot of
right.
fun. We'll see you.
Thank you, Angela.